and then we'll begin. Okay, well, welcome everybody to our webinar that includes a number of great veterans to talk about transition from military life to their civilian lives and how education played a role in that, among many other things. My name is Patrick Mullane. I'm the Executive Director of HBS Online and Executive Education. I also happen to be a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Woo! Dr. Stephanie, how about the Air Force there? Sorry, a little inter-service rivalry. Today, we're going to meet three extraordinary veterans who have not only made the transition, but have excelled in their careers through a lot of hard work and a commitment to lifelong learning, including involvement in Harvard Business School online courses. They've really built some impressive resumes and impactful careers. And so I think they're going to have a lot to offer to those of you who are joining who may find yourself in a situation where you're considering a transition yourself. So let me briefly introduce them, and then we're going to have them fill out their resumes more broadly in a brief moment. So first, we have Dewante Parks, a veteran of Oklahoma's 45th Infantry Brigade, who served critical leadership roles in public, private, and the nonprofit sector. We also have Dr. Stephanie Parson, a former U.S. Air Force officer and president and CEO of solution integration provider Crowned Grace International. And finally, we can't leave out the Marine Corps. We've got Derek Mendez, who's joining us from Japan. So thank you, Derek, and glad to see that the Wi-Fi is working well, apparently. He's, as I said, a U.S. Marine Corps vet who's brought his military leadership skills to the nonprofit sector and recently accepted a new federal position as a budget analyst with the Department of the Air Force out of March Air Force Base. So we'll further explore their journeys from the military to the business world, how their military experiences shaped their leadership approach, and the role that HBS Online courses played in helping them achieve their personal and professional goals. At the end, we'll also take audience questions, so feel free to submit them using the Zoom Q&A or on our social channels. Okay, with that, let's get started. And by the way, I apologize. I got some notes up here, so you may see my eyes bouncing around from our panelists to all of you out there in the live stream sphere. We'll reference my notes during questions here as well. So let's start here. I mentioned that we'd like each of you to briefly share your journey from military service to where you are today. And what inspired you and kind of gave you the impulse to decide to leave the military and go into the private sector? So I'll start with you, Dewante, if you don't mind answering that question.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Patrick. My journey from the military service and combat operations to where I was able to, grow and step into areas beyond my comfort zone allowed me to really figure out what the next steps were. Serving as an infantry soldier taught me resilience and the value of leading through challenges, installing a sense of purpose and accountability. After leaving the military, I was determined to keep pushing myself in a meaningful way, searching opportunities where I could make a real impact. I was inspired to pursue a civilian career because I wanted to give back to the community in a meaningful way. My experience motivated me to work on solutions in areas like workforce development, veteran advocacy, infrastructure strategy, healthcare initiatives, and economic growth. The drive has shaped my career both in construction management and in career-focused roles, where my goals is to bridge gaps and create opportunities that strengthen communities to help people thrive. Now, what inspired me to do the Harvard Business School online was I was initially drawn because I wanted to build a stronger foundation in leadership, strategy, and innovation. I knew to make a meaningful impact in the community and career, I needed more advanced skills in these areas, especially as I look toward taking a more responsible and navigating complex challenges.
Thanks very much, Dewante. Hey, one other quick question, because I don't believe I recall asking this before. How many years were you in the military?
I was in for 11 years with two deployments.
Awesome. Thank you, Dewante. Okay, next, let's go across the Pacific to Derek. I didn't ask you, Derek, what time is it for you there?
Let's see here. It is 5:38 in the morning.
Oh, nice, nice. Well, as a former U.S. Marine guy, you know you're used to these early wake ups, I hope. So, thanks for joining us. So, same question for you. Tell us a little bit about your transition from the military, your decision to transition from the military to the private sector or
Of
nonprofit
course, thank
sector in
you.
your case. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always had the goal of joining for an enlistment and then using my knowledge and skills to start a business afterwards. And that's exactly what I did. I was in for one enlistment for 5 years in the United States Marine Corps. And while I was in, I started a technology startup with one of my friends. And after that kind of ran its course, I ended up with at Working Wardrobes, where I was the client services manager, where I oversaw the veterans program, where we helped homeless veterans and their families overcome their barriers to transition. I had a difficult transition. Not everything went the way that I had planned, and I'm sure some people on this call can relate to that as well. And one of the things that led me to pursue the Harvard Business School online was I wanted to work more in the financial sector. I was really touched by my CFO and his story at Working Wardrobes, which is where I used to work, and that is that he also had a difficult time in the civilian world and eventually found his way in the financial sector. He worked his way up from an accountant all the way up to a CFO, and that's why I ended up enrolling in three separate certifications and completing each of those all in the finance. And I feel sustainable investing and financial accounting were the ones that had the biggest impact on where I am now. So, in addition to being in the Marine Corps, I also did 3.5 years in the California State Guard as well.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Derek. And I'm curious, just a quick question. Did you find learning accounting difficult? Because I don't think you had a background in it before. Did you find it, you were able to pick it up pretty quickly?
It is its own language. You do have quite a bit of a learning curve, starting from the beginning, knowing the difference between credits and debits, and learning what exactly the IRS is looking for in your individual state codes on how you're supposed to document everything uh, within each of your ledgers.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit to learn, but the software has come a long way, and I feel that the tools that I learned in this program definitely helped me out. And it was actually mentioned during my interview recently for the Department of the Air Force as a budget analyst. They mentioned the certifications that I got, and they asked me what I learned during the programs, and I was able to speak highly about it to where ultimately they chose me over someone, and they let me know this who was a CPA. I'm not saying that this will do that for everybody, but that is something that they did let me know.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. I have a math undergraduate degree, and when I heard about studying accounting, I'm like, it's debits and credits, and it's addition and subtraction. It's not complex math. How hard can it be? And I was wrong to be too dismissive. It can be difficult at times. So, thanks very much, Dr. Stephanie Parson. Same question for you. Your transition from the military to the private sector.
So mine was an interesting journey because, I started out as an Army brat. And so my entire life, I've moved every 4 years, then did JROTC, Air Force, and then tried Army ROTC and ended up in Air Force ROTC with my commission, of course. And from there, I don't know if you all recall, but back in the 90s, there were several discussions about reduction in forces. And so although I had my regular commission, I had the definitely promote, I had a line number for major or 04, I still would go on practice interviews because I just didn't know. And so in the practice interviews, I received two offers. One offer, same offer that everybody else was getting that was thinking about getting out. And then I got another offer from a Fortune level company in New York. Now, my background is communications and computers. And so what this New York firm offered me was beyond belief, to the point where our general officer said, "Can you hire me once I retire?" And so I had to make the decision at that point, stay in, continue on with the military journey, which is part of who I am, or try something different. So lots of prayer, whole lot of prayer. And I just took the step of faith saying, you know what, I can go and be a director of infrastructure for Seagram Spirits and Wine, Chateau and Estates, Tropicana, and Universal Studios. So that's my military to civilian journey. And then, you know, after that, of course, had a couple of other opportunities, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that led to starting my own company. I'm an avid learner. And in fact, earlier, before all the other folks came on board, you asked, what courses have you taken? And I had to look around to see where my certificates were, just to see what courses I was able to take from an online perspective at HBS. I would say the journey from military to civilian life is not necessarily an easy one, but no matter where you are in your military journey, you are going to retire or separate one day. And so if you know anything about TAP or NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, part of the core motto for NDAA is go early and go often. Go early, go often. And so no matter where you are on your journey, this is the time to start preparing. As an avid learner, I say continue to learn. The Harvard Business School online program is a phenomenal way just to stay in touch and to help you mentally transition how you behave, how you interact, how you communicate on a civilian level, which is going to be so critical for everyone's success.
Yeah, you know, I had a similar experience to you because I had been in the Air Force for 5 years, and then there was an opportunity I owed a little more time because I got a master's degree while I was in the military, but they were doing a forced drawdown, and I had the opportunity to leave even though I hadn't completed my service to repay the loan. It's a combination of they gave me some time back, but I still had to pay some of the degree back. But you said something I think is really important is, you know, eventually you're going to leave. And so you'll face this one way or the other. And I also think that when you're young, whether you're enlisted, whether you're an officer, a 20-year career sounds like forever when you're 18 or you're 22. And then you go to bed one day and you wake up and it's gone. And now you're in your early 40s and you're retiring. The early 40s, I'm 56, like that happened a long time ago. So you're going to have another act almost certainly, and you'll probably want one if you've been in the military. It's not like you're looking to be a couch potato. So it's a great advice to kind of think about that. What was, you touched on this a little bit, but what was kind of the biggest challenge for you that you recall during your transition?
I like telling stories, Patrick. So one of the biggest challenges for me personally was the language translation, right? So zeros and one, computer background. Yes, I'm old enough to have coded in machine language, but you know, so I can talk computers. I know garbage in, garbage out, and I can easily understand different programming languages. You and Derek talked about accounting earlier. So I went to this meeting with a bunch of senior level executives. They were Fortune level, CIOs, directors, CTOs, and so forth. And I decided I was going to be big and bad and scribe that day. And someone said, well, you know, we've got this M&A that we've got to discuss. I had no idea what M&A was. So I wrote down M, letter N, and A. Right. And so the awakening is you've got to be able to talk the language of where you're going. And so I went from Office of Special Investigations, which is where the Bionic Man was assigned, if you recall, the $6 million man. So I went from OSI to Seagram Spirits and Wine. I had to not only learn how they used systems, but I had to learn how they made product. You know, I went to the Tropicana site, I went to Universal Studios, I went to the original site in Canada, just to understand not only how we made the product, but how we introduced the product and sold the product. If that makes sense to anyone.
That's awesome. A great story. Thank you very much for that, Stephanie. Derek, let's go back to you for a minute. How has your time in the military influence your approach to business and leadership? And it's kind of interesting because you were kind of had a foot in the private sector, it sounds like, while you were in the military. So say a little more about what how your worlds blended or didn't, you know, during your transition.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Great question. Very similar to Dr. Stephanie, where I had to relearn the lingo. where we like to shorthand everything, and that's not exactly the most effective approach. And also, one thing that I had to learn was empathy as well. We can be very direct in the military, and that doesn't always come off the best whenever you have to think about everybody's feelings, emotions, and everybody's coming from different backgrounds. And especially now today, when we've got such a focus on DEI, you got to make sure that you're including everybody, their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, where they're coming from, maybe things that you've never even considered because it wasn't a big deal back then, but now it's a big deal to everybody. Like the things that you feel might be small are a mountain to somebody else. It might be an obstacle. So something as similar, as simple as using somebody's pronouns, you may not be aware that that is very important to the other individual. Whereas in the military, you might just call them by some aggressive nickname that you made up for them. Uh, so I would say learning a little more empathy and learning how to communicate more effectively is something that was a little bit of a struggle for me. And that is something that I've had to work on continuously. And it's not something that I feel is ever just, yeah, you reach the finish line for. It's just a continuous learning on how to adapt and accommodate everybody's needs.
Yeah, it's funny. I tell people this story all the time when you talked about being more empathetic. I remember going after I got out of the military doing this personality assessment, and it measured you on a number of metrics. But one of the ones it measured was how comfortable you were with ambiguity and uncertainty. And I was like just off the charts with my comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. And I thought that was a good thing, especially as an entrepreneur. That would be very helpful. And I remember the woman said to me, well, don't, slow down there, mister. It can actually be a real problem. And I said, why? And I now realize she's 100% right. She said, people who have the trait you have tend to get very impatient with those who don't. And most people don't have comfort with ambiguity. I do think in the military, it's kind of trained into you. It's that old adage about the best laid plans, don't survive the first shots being fired, right? You're taught to deal with imperfect information and make decisions with it. And a lot of people don't have that training or just don't have it in their DNA. So really appreciating that and not just expecting everybody to fall in line and be comfortable with ambiguity, I think is something I've really, really learned. Dewante, tell me a little bit about how you adapted your leadership skills across the diverse environments you've been in, because you've been public, private, you've been military, and the role that lifelong learning played in it, which you touched on a little bit earlier, but tell us more.
It's been a struggle, right? It's been a struggle, and I'm going to kind of echo what everyone else is saying, especially when we get out of the military. We do have that direct focus, and you're right, Derek, that we do have to kind of modify and soften some of our approaches. Being able to navigate within the public, private, non-profit sectors has been, challenging and also rewarding. I would say I took a nonprofit director role during COVID, one of the hardest times, and definitely really tested my leadership skills and being able to move things forward. But each environment has really taught me how to approach things in different lights, right? Each class or each course that I complete, I'm looking at things through a different lens, right? So am I focusing on empathy and collaboration, within a nonprofit space? Or if I'm talking to businesses, I'm looking at innovation or efficiency, right? So I've learned that the roles have made me, as you said, Patrick, comfortable in uncomfortable spaces is something that I'm accustomed to, right? Something for the lifelong learning. I mean, I believe that in our time, and especially coming off of COVID, that we must continue with our education or at least challenging ourselves or putting more tools in our tool belt from a leadership kind of perspective, because things that worked before, of course, we didn't have a global pandemic that really had an impact on us. Now we have to start looking at what if kind of scenarios. And this is something that I could say, maybe speak, pretty clearly for the rest of the veterans on here. We plan for, contingency A, B through C, D, E, F, all the way to Z plus one So we're always looking at ways to be more efficient and effective. And I believe that the classes at Harvard have allowed me to look at things through multiple lenses to make sure I come up with a more strong, suitable response.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. If you have more in your basket to kind of pull from, then you got more chance that you have an option that'll work, no matter what the challenge is. Stephanie, back to you. Given your experience in Fortune 500 companies, you mentioned some of them, including Walt Disney World. What leadership lessons from the military help you navigate, higher profile corporate roles? And I'm curious, I'll challenge you a little bit, and I'm kind of throwing you a cold call here, so forgive me. What is one that people wouldn't expect? I mean, I think people would say, oh, well, you have leadership, you have command of people at some point, almost everybody does in the military. Is there anything that people may not think about that you would point to as an interesting lesson from your experience in the military?
I think interesting lesson, maybe key attribute that we gain in the military that is there's a continued need to have in the private sector is the ability to make decisions. All right. In the military, I believe we get as many facts as we possibly can get. And for that moment in time, and we make a decision. We don't have the option of saying, let me wait another day, let me wait another day, let me wait another day. Sometimes in the private sector, there's frustration amongst the team because we're continuing to wait another day for another piece of data. And so transitioning that ability to make decisions, because if you don't make a decision, think about it, you're making a decision, right? And so the ability that we gain in the military in being able to make a decision, but also giving ourselves a little bit of leeway to adjust that decision based on new information, I believe that's critical for us to transition. I made up a word a couple of years ago with our Nuclear Regulatory Commission client, or our team did, I won't say I did it, but our team made up a word called fungibility. Right? So you've got to be flexible, you've got to have fun, and you've got to be agile. Right? And so how do you take the fungibility and carry it into the private sector and continue to move the organization forward? Did I answer your question, or
yes.
Did I answer the
question?
Very
well. Very well. And in fact, I do think that people assume in the private sector, military people are all about make a decision and just run with it. But you touched on something real important, which is, as I said earlier, you make a decision with imperfect information, but as time passes, more information comes in and you need to be able to pivot. One of the worst things you can do is, and I say this about entrepreneurs, I may even mention in the article that was just posted by our colleagues here, but is that, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who have an idea and make a command decision about what they're going to pursue. And then the market tells them something different, but they're so hung up on their idea, they keep pressing. And then before you know it, your idea is failed effectively in the market. So being able to take new information and assimilate, I think, is pretty important. Derek, you served as a supply chain manager in the Marine Corps. What about that job has allowed you to transfer skills to the nonprofit sector? And what role, you already touched on this a little bit, but the extent that you can add more color about how the finance course played a role in helping you advance your career.
That's another great question. What I learned as a supply chain manager is you have to be ready for anything. And a lot of businesses like to throw that all-encompassing and additional duties whenever you get the position. So they can just throw on additional things. So you have to kind of be prepared for everything. And one thing that prepared me for that in the Marine Corps is, as a supply chain manager, they send you all over different bases for different trainings, for different courses. You might be stationed one place, they send you to another place to get a certification. And that has prepared me for a lot of the curveballs that were thrown at me throughout various sales positions, and especially in the nonprofit world as well, where at a smaller nonprofit, you might wear many hats. So you might be someone who is supposed to be in charge of a certain grant, a certain program. You're in charge of different reporting and putting together those reports for like the Department of Labor or a local county. or you might need to be reaching out to local officials, government officials, your local legislators, and you might actually have to raise additional funds as well, reaching out on those Giving Tuesdays, on the Veterans Days, sharing social media posts as well. So those are all things that you don't think about whenever you initially take on that first role. And when you move up at certain companies, you have to be more willing to have your hand in a lot of different honeypots, so to speak. And what was the second part to your question? I'm
It
sorry.
was just if you had any more thoughts on, you mentioned your accounting, you also took finance, and I think one other course, and I'm just curious about how those fit into your plan too. I think did you take the finance and accounting learning track? Is that how you ended up with those 3 courses?
Yes, that's correct. And the way that that was able to help me out is I really did enjoy the case-based studies that are in each of the curriculum. It's able to give you readily applicable and cases that actually happen. So they're all relevant uh, to what happened in the real world and what you can potentially expect whenever you take on a role in finance or accounting. So that helped me out a lot. I like the practical application of, instead of just a lot of colleges will do hypotheticals. If you were to do this, then this will happen. But what actually happened with my case studies that I did throughout each of these certifications was this happened. This is how I want to see how you respond first. And then it tells you this is what actually happened and this was the outcome of it, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It really hit home to me. It got me past that mental block where you're like, am I really actually learning anything in this course, or am I just doing it for the certificate? But I actually thoroughly enjoyed it and learned quite a bit and was able to use that knowledge in my interviews for this next position.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And for those who don't know who might be watching this webinar, the case method is, as I like to describe it, is essentially learning through storytelling. It's painting a picture of a real manager facing a real problem. And then, as Derek said, kind of teeing it up with you, having you put yourself in the shoes of that person, and then think about what you would do or how you would react. So it's not based on a textbook theory. Again, as you said, Derek, it's about real problems that people face in the world and how the application of business principles helps you solve those problems. I had the same reaction as an MBA student. Like when I came out of that, I wondered why everything isn't taught with the case method, because I thought it was so much more applicable to the real world. Admittedly, as somebody who got a math degree, I think it might be tough to teach like math and some things and only through the case method. But even there, it could probably be used, more often for sure. I wanted to jump to a question that came from the audience, Jorge, for you, Dewante. But I'll throw it in for you, Stephanie, as well, because we had a question Jorge submitted before the session. We had one come through during the session. And that one reads from a question all the way from London, from somebody who says, to you, Stephanie, you hold 2 PhDs and dual master's degrees. How did you manage the rigors of academic pursuit alongside your professional career, and what motivated you to keep pushing your educational boundaries? So I'd like to hear from both of you, because I think it's essentially the same question, and how you kind of balance and manage your academic work with your job. Dewante, why don't we start with you, and we'll go to Stephanie.
Wow, that's an interesting one. To give a little bit more context about my educational journey, especially whether it be military. I finished my associate's degree while I was in Afghanistan doing combat operations. I went back home to Oklahoma. I got a bachelor's in administrative leadership, and then also got a master's, and just started racking up a whole ton of different masters. One semester I can actually recall where I did, and I highly don't recommend this, but I did 15 hours in one college and 18 hours in another college in the same semester. So I don't recommend that, but I would say that the thing that helps me out the most as far as the balance is definitely a good, strong time management philosophy, right? What's going to work best for you, making sure you have the downtime to attain the information that's been put in front of you. Then also, what is your why, right? I think the why has got to be the most important factor on why are you doing this, making sure that that's at the forefront, because there's going to be times where you know, you worked a long day, you still have to write that paper that's due, or you need to do this class that's due. So your why needs to be fairly important. So I say the takeaways from my perspective would be the why, and then a good strong time management aspect.
Yeah, I don't. You must be like the champion, the Taylor Swift of time management, doing that many credit hours in one semester. That's amazing. Stephanie, how about you?
I always laugh at that question because when I finished with my bachelor's, I was done with school.
Yeah.
I was not going after another degree whatsoever. However, as you know, Patrick, to get the major, to get the Oak Leaf, you've got to have your master's degree, right? And so I did that to check a box. I'm a continuous learner. I discovered that I enjoyed learning, not necessarily the formal degrees, but I enjoyed learning. I think my first PhD is when that was the degree for me. You know, it was something that I could do and I enjoyed it. I don't have the second one yet. I'm on chapter 3 of my dissertation. And so I'm still learning there. But I would share with you, I think it's the continuous learning that continues to be important to me. And in fact, you know, even within our company, when you first join the company, within the first 6 months, you get your Six Sigma certification. Your second 6 months, you get your project management qualification. So my love of learning transcends throughout the company. And I think if you don't continue to learn, you easily get lost. For example, right now, the entire corporation is going through an intro to artificial intelligence, right? Because we have to be able to speak and help our clients get to where they want to go. I'm still part of that balanced scorecard. If you've been a part of Harvard for any length of time, you know the BSC had the honor of speaking on a panel with the developers, one of the developers of the BSC. And in our BSC, it continues to say, how do we attract, maintain, and retain top talent? And maintaining is that continuous learning. And you've got to continue to learn. You've got to continue to ask, why am I doing this? Why am I here? How does this apply to my whole life versus just my work life?
Yeah, you bring up something that there was the former dean of the Harvard Extension School here used to talk about what he called the 80-year curriculum. And he pointed out, and it's true, that it seems silly that you go through, you know, your K through 12 education, then you go get a bachelor's degree, those who choose to do it. And then you're done when you still got 70% of your life, God willing, ahead of you, right? So the idea that your curriculum should end there and not extend beyond that point in your life when you might get that bachelor's degree, I think is a really great point. You know, it's hard though. People's life gets in the way, right? You get families and children in a lot of cases, jobs that get in the way. So it gets back to what Devontae was saying, having some time management to help you get there is absolutely critical. Another question from John that came through before was, and for you, Derek, from your perspective, actually, I've got two for you, Derek. One is, what made you decide to go into the nonprofit world versus, you know, the for-profit world? And you've done a little of both, I think, if I recall. So say a little bit about that. Well, why don't you answer that question, then I'll answer or ask you the second one rather.
Of course, thank you. Well, one thing was I was working retail as an assistant manager, and as you know, as most people know, retail can be pretty hectic, and you can't take vacation when you would like to. Also, at this particular big box retailer where I was working, I couldn't balance going to school and also like my home life and my work life as well, trying to climb the corporate ladder as it is. So what I ended up doing was going with the nonprofit that had helped me and many veterans that I know in the past, which is Working Wardrobes out of Santa Ana, California. And I switched over there, and they were able to work with my schedule as I went back for my master's degree. And what ended up happening was 2 months into my MBA program at Pepperdine, we ended up entering into the COVID pandemic lockdowns. So I ended up having to homeschool my daughters while also going for my MBA as well. And that was very difficult, but my employer in the nonprofit employer was able to work with me, work with my schedule, and was able to be very understanding. Whereas I understand that a lot of corporate positions or retailers may not necessarily help you out there. So that definitely helped me out. So those were a lot of the factors in switching over from the corporate to the nonprofit world.
Thank you. That's really interesting. It doesn't surprise me that we have so many people who are in a mission, obviously the military is mission driven. And so it makes sense that a lot of people would be interested in the nonprofit sector. Not that the private sector can't be mission driven. Every good company should have a mission, but working on the big problems for society, I think is something that I love about the military community. And then the follow-up, Derek, was from your perspective, what's the biggest difference between leading in uniform and leading as a civilian?
Yes, another great question. So leading in uniform, you can be, I mentioned this a little bit before, but you can be a little more direct. And those in uniform understand that the mission comes first. You accomplish the mission, and then you can like sit down and possibly relax afterwards, but at least knowing that you've accomplished your mission, you get kind of a feel good emotion from that. So when I would give my Marines something to do, it was with the expectation of please get this done as quickly as possible, even though you're saying, hey, please, or hey, PFC Schmuckatelli, go do this. So they would run off, accomplish that mission, come back, let us know that it was actually accomplished, ideally, and then we'd go on to the next task. One thing that I had to learn leading in the civilian and nonprofit world and the retail world as well is that when you give someone a task to do, you probably need to do some drive-bys. You need to ask them how it's going throughout the process. If you have any questions, did I give you all the tools you need to succeed? Were you properly trained on this? Like, what can I do to help you out with this? And then you do multiple check-ins, and they may or may not accomplish it on time. And then if they don't accomplish it on time, you have to be very empathetic. What went wrong here? How can we do this? Kind of like an after action report, but a lot more thorough, a lot more often is what I've noticed. So maybe taking a step back, doing the assessment of, was this like this person came from a different world. Maybe they came from the corporate world, maybe they came from a nonprofit where they didn't have the tools that we have at our nonprofit, or maybe they're used to a different process. Whereas in the Marine Corps, most things are standardized. Like there's some autonomy from unit to unit, but for the most part, it's in the military, it's you've got standard ways of doing things. But from company to company, even if it's right down the street, you've got the same mission. They're doing things vastly different. So taking that step back, being a little more empathetic, understanding where they're coming from, doing multiple check-ins, and making sure that they have all the tools that they need to succeed, and then asking just before the deadline, do you have everything you need? Can you still get to this to me on time? Following up on emails, sending email reminders, calendar updates, scheduling a meeting to plan the meeting, to plan accomplishment of the project. That's all different than how we were, or how I felt I was in uniform.
Yeah, one thing that I tell people too is I think there are differences to be sure, but in the end, people are people. And I found in my experience that a lot of things that I learned in the military are completely transferable. And in fact, those who work for me who might be listening to this, we had a decision at HBS around having to do with remote work and things. And, there's a lot of companies are going through this now about how do you think about remote work versus in-person work. And there's a lot of places you can end up on that continuum. And ultimately, there are decision makers, though, who, you make your case, but somebody has to make a decision. And then eventually you kind of have to say, okay, whether you like it or not, we all have to kind of align and march in the same direction, metaphorically, of course. That felt very, very similar in my experience to my military days. And while you can be more direct, there are still times when, doing the soft approach work too. Maybe that's an Air Force thing. I don't know. I'm sure our inter-service rivals will give me a hard time about that one. So
Can I add
one
to
of the
that?
yeah, go ahead.
Add to that, I think one of the greatest things that we learn in the military is how to trust our leaders. Now, we don't use the term employees, we use the term leaders within Crowned Grace. And so in the military, you are forced to trust your direct reports who are responsible for more people, and they have to trust their direct reports. And so I think that's one of the most beautiful things that may transition from the military to the private sector, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, not-for-profit, is that when you can easily trust first and allow the person to make a mistake, right? And
Yep.
so that the beautifulness, making up another word, which I love to do, the beautifulness of trusting your leader of leaders to make the right decision because they understand the core values, the core mission of the organization. It's a beautiful thing. And I believe a lot of folks who have only done the private sector or the not-for-profit sector, they're not necessarily used to automatic trust. And when they receive it, it's almost like they stand up taller. It's like, yes, I'm a leader of leaders and I can make decisions. And I think that we learned that while we were in the military.
Yeah, it's one of my mantras is pushing the decision making down the organization as far as it possibly can go, because it's empowering the people. It's in a large organization, it's the only way to ensure things are actually getting done. And I would say that I definitely learned the old adage about, it's obviously your war fighters ultimately. And if something bad happens to those above you, you may be left with decisions that you didn't want to have to make. So you might as well start practicing now to make the ones you can. So Duante, I want to go back to you as we get toward the tail end of the questions here. I am curious about, and then I want to ask Stephanie and Derek this as well. One thing that seems to have changed over time is there was a time when only the degree was valued, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, whatever it was. And now there's been a pretty significant proliferation of non-degree programs, both online and in person. In your experience, to the extent that you talk to other people about what you're doing from an educational perspective, how do people view your certificates versus your degrees? Do they see them as having a different purpose? It sounds like you think they serve a different purpose, right? It's about getting this kind of pointed learning in maybe a shorter amount of time and then taking more of them to get cross-disciplinary experience. But I'm curious, Duante, what your experience has been there.
Patrick, that's a great question, and I think we've been having this discussion nationwide on, are we really going to put an emphasis on degrees? Because I think that limits a lot of people with getting into certain roles. But certifications, I mean, I talk about the multiple certifications that I have through Harvard Business School right now. I think I'm tracking at 4 right now.
You have 4 of the learning tracks, which means you've got actually like 12 of the underlying certifications.
Everybody out there, I like to continually push myself. So if you go to my LinkedIn account, it looks like a dissertation, and trust me, I just like to challenge myself. But when we look at it, we want to give people more of the opportunities. And I think, and this is something that Dr. Stephanie was talking about, being a lifelong learner, we're giving everybody the opportunity to get it in short bursts, right? Those, we just don't have, the time to write the papers and the dissertation or this or that. And by the time that you graduate with that degree, the world has done moved on. You're about 5 years behind. So we get having something within something short and sweet within 3 weeks. I'm sorry, 7 to 8 weeks. Talked about what Derek's saying. We get those case studies where we're actually seeing how will we act in those opportunities or operate within that space is phenomenal. So I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis placed on certificates, because it's given the amount of information that's needed within that short period to move forward. It's great that we can do degrees and stuff, but I don't feel that it's holding as much weight as it has in the last couple of decades, because we're not able to see a good solid return on investment. So like Derek says, and I think Derek is one of the and I'm just going to put you on that pedestal, Derek, of saying you can create you can finish the course, and you can actually find the information that you've learned within this 7 to 8 weeks, make it applicable towards whatever situation that you have, and automatically get that plug and play. So the return on investment is going to be extremely high by going with that factor. So
speaking of return on investment, Duante, one thing that we hire a research firm to survey our participants every couple of years just to dive deep into some questions. And you like to think, I believe that business taught well is good for the world. Capitalism has helped lift people out of poverty around the world, millions, tens of millions of people over the last several decades. And so, there are problems with it, and we talk about those at HBS. It has to be done well for it to work for everybody. But I really have really care that people find it helps them, but it's hard to know sometimes, right? People come in, they take a course, they disappear. We went out and surveyed them and asked, if it helped them get promoted and or get a raise. And I was surprised at the number of people that said that it did help them get a raise. And it was like a 10x return on the investment, because the investment is relatively very low compared to a degree. That was really encouraging for me because, it validated what we hope to be true. And not that the money side is the only measure, but certainly it also indicates being more senior in an organization, which means you have more decision rights, which means you can have more impact. So there's lots of good that can come out of, having this more targeted learning.
And Patrick, I wanted just to do a quick plug in too, where you're getting the opportunity to look at problems and situations and issues through multiple lenses through a shorter time period too. So I wanted to say that that's extremely important.
Yeah.
That we just don't put enough value on.
Yeah, Stephanie, I'll probably finish here with you, Stephanie, because we're up against time. And Derek already talked about how he got asked about this during his interview process, taking the accounting and finance courses. But I'm curious as to your take, and given your experience across, like Duante, across many academic experiences, how do you think about the use of a certificate or the value of a certificate versus a degree, and how others might view it as well?
I'm going to do it from I'll share with you what one of our leaders told us. Is that we invested in him by allowing him to go through a certification program, and now he is more valuable on the outside world. And so another set of leaders, we talked about Transition Assistance Program earlier, TAP. We had another set of leaders out of San Antonio, Texas. They all received Six Sigma, their PMQ certification. We also did a customer experience certification program and data analytics. And because they were able to have all those certifications on their resume, when we sadly lost the contract, they were able to 10x their salary because of the certifications. So for me, learning is just a gift, period. But when we see our leaders being able to talk, walk, and get more because they obtained the certifications, what better thing is there?
Yeah,
right?
it's really gratifying.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks to all three of you. It's been wonderful. I was mentioning to all of you, I got the chance to have lunch with several Marines on campus at HBS today. So I've had my my annual dose of military. I don't get enough of it, so it's fun to reconnect with fellow veterans. So I really appreciate you taking the time and enjoyed speaking with you. And for those who are watching and listening out there, if you're interested in developing your business and leadership skills, we encourage you to explore our range of courses. You can see us and all we have to offer at online.hbs.edu. And one thing that I think is important that I want to mention is we offer a military grant for active service members and veterans of the U.S. military. So the grants this year have been awarded for the current application window. The next one opens January 6th of 2025. So just about a month and a half, or excuse me, 2.5 months from now. Actually, that's holy crap. That is actually 2 months from now, isn't it? So the grant can be used for a single course enrollment, and all you need to do is provide a document verifying your military status. So thank you again for joining us, everybody. It was wonderful to have the conversation. Thanks to all of you who submitted questions. We really appreciate it. Have a great evening and a great transition if you're leaving the military to the private sector. The water's warm over here. Come on over. You'll enjoy it. Bye-bye.